This is the Federal Mobility Policy Update with Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, Martha Rosowski from the Mobility and Access Collaborative, and Daryl Young from the Summit Foundation. Late last week, the House of Representatives unveiled a $547 billion transportation bill. It sets ambitious goals for climate, fixing roads, safety, transit, biking, and walking. It also makes sizable investments in electric vehicle charging stations. We'll talk about the bill along with efforts to include funding for transit operations. Lastly, we'll talk about the next steps to advancing the House bill and the opportunities to fix the Senate's very weak alternative. All that and more on this week's episode of the Federal Mobility Policy Update. Welcome to another Federal Mobility Policy Update. This week we've got breaking news about what the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee just issued last week. It will be taken up this Wednesday. It's a 5-year, $547 billion bill. It is pronounced in the way that it looks at climate and how it basically makes every action on federal transportation programs responsible for its climate impact. Beyond a whole host of other good things, let's cover that. Let's compare it to the Senate bill and where we move from here. So with us today, we have Beth Osborne from the Transportation for America. Welcome, Beth.
Thanks.
We've got Martha Rosowski from the Mobility and Access Collaborative. Hello, Martha.
Hello, everybody.
So let's go ahead and start. What is the good, the bad, and the ugly of the House bill?
I don't think we can fairly do a good, the bad, and the ugly on this bill. It's really almost all good or great. There's great provisions, there's good provisions, there's opportunities for additional things that may have been missed in this bill, but it's really hard to come up with something that's bad or ugly in this. I have tiny nitpicks here and there, but it's even hard to nitpick knowing how hard it is to write such a well-crafted bill that addresses all the issues comprehensively and all the different sections connect with each other as well as this one does.
Beth, 1,200 pages? You read 1,200 pages? Whew.
There were a couple things I glanced through and didn't really read, but I probably didn't spend as much time on the Motor Carriers Act as I did on the highway title. But yes, it was a lot of reading, and it was 2 full days over my weekend to do it.
Well, thank you for doing that.
We love you, Beth.
Yeah. I was impressed that there was $7 billion for transportation alternative money. So money for transit and bicycling. It's a 60% increase. What other things that are in it that it sounds like we've finally been heard? What are the things in it?
Well, so what really excites me about this bill is not even the massive increases in things like the Transit Alternatives Program. It's the fact that it makes transfers out of it hard, and it makes it hard to build unsafe roads with the rest of the money. So this has been the pattern for the last 30 years is, someone says, we have a safety problem. And everyone says, you're right, we do have a safety problem, particularly for bicyclists and pedestrians. We should do something about it. And everyone says, what we'll do is we'll create a little pot of funding over here to fix all the damage that's been done. And then we'll spend the big pot making more damage for it. And this bill doesn't do that. Within safety, there are so many provisions that aren't put together, so you might not recognize that they all have a big impact on safety, but it takes away the ability of states to create regressive targets. So, for example, right now they can say 800 people in my state died on the roadways last year. Next year, it's going to be 825. You can't do that anymore. It no longer requires modeling of future traffic, which is always the excuse for not making space for bicyclists and pedestrians. This myth that huge traffic's going to come through and allowing bicyclists, pedestrians on the road will interfere with that, and replaces it with an operational performance standard for all users. It has the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is also increased by a good amount. Has a focus on vulnerable user and safe systems. There's money to connect rail networks. It makes Vision Zero planning and work eligible for funds. It addresses the speed of roadways. There's a nationwide safety assessment. There's all kinds of things in here that go way beyond the amount of funding in the Transportation Alternatives Program.
I was impressed that it from just reading press coverage that it actually said that when planning for new infrastructure, they had to consider climate change. What's the actual impact of new infrastructure? So new roads, what is the climate impact of that going to be? Right.
The list on climate changes is also long and impressive. I have this for every issue that I've been paying attention to. It establishes a greenhouse gas performance measure and doesn't allow negative targets on it either. So you can't set a target for more CO2. As opposed to the Senate bill, no one gets to opt out of it. There's a resilience program and a requirement that there's resilience in projects to address emergencies. So if your roadway gets washed out, when you use your emergency funds to replace it, you don't get to replace it in kind. You've got to make it more resilient. There is a carbon reduction program, but there's also there's a requirement that there's better modeling to make sure that we're not pretending that certain projects will reduce pollution when it won't. There's so much that is exciting in this bill.
All right.
Even get into the EV language and the refueling stations and all of those things that are also in there.
There was $4 billion for electric vehicle charging stations. I mean, it felt like it was the buffet that we want. It was everything we want, which is a good sign.
It was, and I think some people might be tempted to complain that there's more carbon reduction money in the Senate bill. But the Senate bill, and I think it is something like $7 billion for the carbon reduction, whereas this one is less. But the overall program in the House bill is tuned to better carbon results, whereas in the Senate bill, there's a bigger number, but states can opt out of it and not do anything to reduce carbon. And the rest of the program doesn't have to change to also stop making the problem. So, I mean, really, again, very well crafted bill. And when I say that I've got a long list of improvements in every area I've been paying attention to, I mean, in terms of repairing crumbling roads and bridges, in terms of safety, in terms of multimodal access to jobs and essential services and equity, in terms of climate, in terms of local empowerment, in terms of transit and rail.
So we'll put those in the links. My understanding is that TFRA will have an analysis in 2 parts, and we'll put those in the links at the bottom of this show and in the show notes. Martha.
So great bill. We're all cheery. Last week, we were pretty glum about the Senate bill. What happens? Now we have a really good bill on one side. We have a not great bill on the other side. Is it possible to just get the Senate to adopt the House bill, or are we going to see everything in the House bill like compromised down? I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but what's the next step here?
So traditionally, the next steps, so let me walk through the way things theoretically should work and then how they're going to work.
Okay.
So theoretically, the House marks up a bill that they consider a bill in the committee on Wednesday morning. We do expect it to go pretty quickly. I do expect to see a couple amendments offered, some accepted, some offered and withdrawn. We can talk about where there are opportunities for improvement. But then in the Senate, they've only passed through committee their highway title because they divide the bill up between a whole slew of committees. So the transit title is in the banking and urban affairs committee, and then the rail title is in the commerce committee. So they need to move their bills. I understand commerce is going to move theirs very soon, and I anticipate it being both bipartisan and really good. Transit, and I have to now just point out that the best champion for rail infrastructure in the Senate is Roger Wicker of Mississippi, and we should, make sure that his leadership in this issue has taken us from no program to a reasonably sizable program for rail over the last 5 years, and he's going to be an important part of taking it forward. In terms of banking, I don't think they'll be able to get a deal. I could be wrong. I think whatever deal they could get with Senator Toomey, who has turned very anti-transit recently, would be quite bad. So I'm expecting them just to go straight to the floor, where they'll marry all the titles together and consider it on the floor. The House considers their bill on the floor. Those are brought to a conference committee and a negotiation goes on. With this bill, we've got the American Jobs Plan out there, the negotiations going on between the White House and Senate Republicans headed by Senator Capito from West Virginia. And how all of this gets melded together is totally unclear. My best guess is there will be some kind of American Jobs Plan deal struck that will sweep up reauthorization with it, and it will somehow be moved forward.
So one big package.
Yeah. I mean, if they can come to any agreement and move anything through the Senate ever. There's also a possibility where the desire for bipartisanship and a 60 vote threshold from Senators Manchin and Sinema means that we've already seen pretty much the last of the legislation pass through Congress, except for a budget bill or spending bills.
Do you think there's any opportunity in the House measure for any bipartisan support?
No, and it's not because there's not an opportunity for it, but there's a general position that bipartisanship will not be given. I actually think that that's really the case in the Senate as well. That much like with the January 6th commission, we'll see a lot of negotiating, and no matter how much the Democrats concede in the end, the Republicans really don't have a big incentive to give a big victory to this president. And look, that is it's a tried and true strategy. It worked really well in the run up to the 2016 election. So it would almost be foolish for them to back off of it.
Okay. Whew. All right. Interesting dynamics. So along with the big House and Senate bills, there was a bill recently introduced by Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia around transit operations, which is exciting. Can you help put that in context? I know a lot of our transit advocates are really focused on gaining support for that bill. How does that fit into this bigger picture?
Yes. So the bill will officially be introduced first thing tomorrow morning when the House comes into pro forma session, which just means a session where they're not actively considering legislation. And they're working on getting the final support from members right now, see if they can get a handful of additional original co-sponsors. And then they'll keep seeking more. My guess is Representative Johnson will offer it as an amendment to the House transportation bill. And there's some language in the bill that's a decent jumping off point. Right up front, there's a one-time competitive grant program to provide both capital and operating costs to locals that want to, or to transit agencies that want to increase frequencies of bus service. It's not as comprehensive as what Representative Johnson is putting together, which is a formula program, means every transit agency gets it, and that they can only use it to increase frequencies of their service and to add hours or days to their service. So maybe right now they're only offering peak service times, but they want to go all day. They could use it for that. And then also you can use it to the Johnson bill, you can use it to add to your service area. So you can use it for big expansions as well. And it provides a certain number of years of support before that gets pulled into the baseline and you're expected to keep going, keep expanding. So I think he'll probably offer that. There might be a negotiation to improve the language already in the bill. And my guess is the best thing we can expect out of committee is an agreement to work on the way to the floor for a bolder bill, because this is the kind of thing that does tend to be wrapped into a big package as opposed to argued about within committee.
So our transit advocacy friends are pretty focused on this, but the transit picture is bigger than just the Johnson bill.
Yes. So one thing that Representative DeFazio does deserve credit for is he has increased the portion of the funding in this bill that goes to transit by a little bit. Instead of 80-20, it's more like, where are we? We're something at like 74% for highways and 26% for,
It's a start. It's a start.
It's a start. But if we really want a robust transit program, we need to commit to it the way we have on the highway side. So we want to bring it up we really want to bring it up to the level of the highway program. Right now, transit's at $13 billion, and the highway program is more at $45 billion. Now, this bill actually increases both by a ton. So the transit program will get much bigger regardless, but we really would like to see it come much closer. So there's an effort to elevate the percentage of funds that go to transit, not to take it out of the highways, but to elevate it even more. So I think that Representative Garcia will talk with, and I would imagine folks like Representative Auchincloss from Massachusetts will be interested in promoting that and reminding people of the importance of that. Also something likely to be wrapped into something on the floor and part of grander negotiations. And as part of that, creating a robust fund available to increase frequencies and improve and provide operating support as well, as part of a much bigger pot. What we don't want to do is negotiate to make our little pot include operating. What we want to do is add operating to it and make the overall program bigger. So we have to talk about both.
So there are forces of darkness out there that would not like to see either this or the Senate measure move forward, particularly this one, particularly the House measure. Who's out there that's probably going to be fighting against it?
So it's a really interesting issue. Transportation is so rarely substantive. If you look at the coverage of all of this, it's very dismissive of policy. They'll say things like the bipartisan Senate bill, but nothing about what the bipartisan Senate bill does. They might talk about this as a partisan bill because Republicans don't give it support, but they don't talk about what it does. And if you did, it would sound very different. For example, the House bill that requires departments of transportation to have a plan to maintain their infrastructure before they build more stuff, that doesn't sound highly partisan. Versus the Senate bipartisan bill that gives state DOTs the flexibility to not maintain its existing infrastructure while building new things they can't afford to maintain. You can see how just saying partisan and bipartisan doesn't really get at what we're talking about. So the coverage has been really about the horse race, who's on board, who's not, and how much money you're talking about between the White House and the Senate. And I think that has really diminished the overall drive. And it's allowed a lot of folks that wouldn't like what we're talking about to avoid the substance altogether.
Right.
So theoretically, the folks that won't like this, in general, the reforms I'm talking about and the climate issue reforms and Fix It First and safety and all of that are some of the state DOTs, not all, but their trade group, AASHTO, will not like the loss of flexibility. Now, like I said, it's flexibility to orient your program around more fatalities. I don't think that's a flexibility the American taxpayer wants to give them. But we don't get into the substance. We just stick with flexibility or the flexibility to not maintain its stuff. On transit, there are a lot of people that are going to be very afraid that we're opening the floodgates. There's been a nice bright line between capital and operating. Capital, the feds help with. Operating is state and local, almost always sometimes entirely local, but usually more local. And because highways, we actually have a similar thing. The operating is local, but what I mean by local is each individual driver pays the operating costs. We just slough a lot of the cost off onto the household. But it allows, from a government perspective, to pretend that it's okay to just worry about construction because there's no public operator of highways like transit. Now, if you look at our locks and dams, or you look at our airport and aviation program, we pay tons of operating. But we avoid having that conversation here because it muddles that message of highways and transit have to be capital only. So I think there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, and particularly on the Republican side, that don't like the idea of opening a whole new line of eligibility. I think that there are going to be some more old-fashioned status quo type folks out there that don't like it. And some conservative groups will say that the feds should only be working on things of national significance and while they would be okay with an intersection or an interchange improvement at the local level as being of national significance, apparently, an entire commuter rail system would be of local in their world. So I think those are the things we'll start to hear, and some of the concern voiced.
All right. I think we have accomplished our mission of a really quick overview of 1,200 pages. Any last words, Beth?
No, I will just have to say again, what a great job the Transportation Infrastructure Committee did. Writing this is so hard. Just one title is so hard. And this was really done thoughtfully and well. There are things that are not perfect in it because you'll never get it all perfect, and it's much easier to pick at than it is to write. But just a job well done. Really impressive.
All right. Our last question, cats or dogs or birds?
Cats. I love dogs. I grew up with a dog. I love dogs. I have 2 kids to take care of, and I don't need another kid.
I have cats and dogs. But
You
whether or not you...
Daryl?
What?
The dogs?
I have dogs, and I'll go with dogs, but I also have a cat.
Okay. I'm cats.
Okay. You rescue cats. Good for you.
I do. Fosters.
Yeah. And whether you like cats or dogs, the one thing we know is that the House bill is really good. The Senate needs improvement. We'll update you on what happened in the markup. And if you like this, like it and subscribe, and we'll come up with more updates very soon. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.